second half of this program is really dedicated to Schubert. And initially, the whole idea of this program is going to be dedicated to Schubert. Unlike Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn, these major classical composers, Schubert really didn't have any, friends in high places. People like Haydn and for the first half of his life, Mozart, were essentially servants. They were like, they were at the complete beck and call of whatever lord was in charge of them, and they lived with them and composed whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it. And a lot of the mediums that we think of when we think of classical music were actually mediums that were established because these European nobility in the 17 and early 1800s had such vast resources that they could get together 50 or so orchestral players and say, let's write a symphony because I have the Duke of so-and-so coming over this weekend and I want to impress him. And so Haydn would write a symphony and then it would be played once or twice and then it wouldn't be played again. And maybe, they would sell tickets for it in some major city. But, a lot of these genres were genres that were established because the resources were available to put them on. And then you have a composer like Schubert come along who really idolized the classical composers, and in particular idolized Beethoven. You'll see in the program, he was buried next to Beethoven. He was a torchbearer at Beethoven's funeral. And on his deathbed, literally on his deathbed, one of his friends who played in a string quartet organized for Beethoven's 14th string quartet to be played in the room with him. And at the end of the piece, Schubert, who is notoriously effusive with his composition, said, after that, what is there left to write? There's this incredible humility to Schubert when he thought of all of the classical greats. And so what he wanted to do was write operas, to write masses, to write symphonies, and yet the majority of them were never played in his lifetime, never even staged. He only heard of the 15 or so symphony fragments in 7 complete symphonies that he wrote. He only heard one in his lifetime. Everything else was just a figment of his imagination. And that has always been a really compelling image to me because he didn't have the resources to do what he wanted to do what he really thought of as high art. So what did he do instead? He got together with these groups of people and put on basically parties. If you look at the front of the program, there's a picture of someone at a piano lounging out, seemingly singing. And you might think, since I got the picture from the front of my Schubert piano sonata book, that it was Schubert, but in fact, it was a German baritone named Vogel, which means bird in German. He's this 6'5", and you think about it, in the early 1800s, 6'5" is gargantuan. Very sort of an a-hole. He was well known for being a loud, mean drunk, but he loved him some Schubert, and he constantly insisted on these new songs, write me a song, Schubert. And behind him, I don't know if you can see, but behind him, hunched over the piano with glasses slightly balding and curly hair, that's Schubert. That was the role that he played as a classical musician. He wrote because he couldn't help it. He wrote for people in small gatherings like this one to listen to his music. Much of what he wrote were songs and were dances that people would literally sing together and dance together. You wouldn't get together in a hall and wear a tuxedo and wait between movements. What ties all of this to this particular aspect of the program is really the role that the last sonata plays in Schubert's works. Like Beethoven, who Schubert idolized, the last 3 sonatas that he wrote are commonly called masterpieces. If you read about any of them online, that's what people will say. And in fact, there's a certain stigma against playing them when you're not musically mature enough, something that I chafed against when I was younger. But it's true. These are really profound pieces. And yet, unlike Beethoven, who published them and received a good deal of money for his final 3 piano sonatas, and they were well regarded and frequently performed within his lifetime, Schubert never published his. And it was beyond never publishing them. He offered them to his publisher, and his publisher declined, saying, not at this time, but we love more piano miniatures and songs. So I thought a good way to start the second half of the program, before we get into this real masterpiece, was to play one of these piano miniatures by Schubert. It's an impromptu, which means the same thing as it does in English. You sort of throw it together at the last minute. It's quite short. It starts out confident, happy, probably the happiest music that we've heard so far, but it pretty quickly takes a turn for the darker. So this is Schubert's impromptu in E flat major. initially debated talking about this on the program, but it really was the reason I decided to put this piece on the program. The reason that this piece really stuck out to me, if you're a pianist, you know this piece. This is it's a famous piece. It's challenging, it's exciting, and it's short. And it covers a lot of ground. I mean, try and cover that much narrative ground in a 3.5-minute movie. I don't think it's possible. You need to establish characters. You need to set the scene. You need all of the elements of narrative. Speaking of narrative in music, is really why I put the piece on the program. I read this amazing article. I considered printing out until I was shot down so I could hand out to all of you guys. It's called The Impromptu That Trod on a Loaf. I don't know if you know I think it's a Brothers Grimm. It might be Hans Christian Andersen, but I'm forgetting right now. But it's one of the major fairy tale writers from Europe at that time. And it's the author of this article draws a connection between this piece and this story, The Girl Who Trod on a Loaf. And in this story, it's a very dark story. I think it's difficult to even see a moral in it from our eyes. This little girl is walking in the rain. And there's a loaf of bread in a puddle. And to cross over the puddle, she uses the bread as a stepping stone. And for her insolence and maybe negligence at using this piece of bread instead of picking it up, I'm not really sure what she would have done as an alternative. She is sucked into hell and tortured for all eternity. And this author makes what I find to be the very compelling case that this piece pulls the same sort of narrative trick. You start out with this happy melody, and then a very, very small change. So you're in E flat, and then it transitions to, so it's, that's the only change, and yet it changes the complete character of the piece. And we end, not in, but an E flat minor. The author believed that what we could take away from this sort of narrative that we could take away is that in this early era of romanticism, when composers and people are finally breaking out of the chains of feudalism, that these small changes in their personality to embrace their individualism can sometimes lead to very, very dire consequences. And this small shift, lowering that third from the major third to a minor third, and then ending the piece in that way, even over such a short span, is the way that Schubert does that. It's sort of a cautionary tale about, perhaps being a little bit too individualistic. The next piece I'm going to play, as far as Schubert is concerned, is the polar opposite. Not only does it start and end in a major key, and start and end in the same key, which is typical for the time, but it also is what we would think of as a classical form. It's a 4-movement piano sonata with a fast movement, a slow movement, a fast movement, a fast movement, just like almost all the ones that Beethoven wrote were. This one I think is especially remarkable because it holds at the same time this extraordinarily laid-back, slow-moving melody that's almost reverent with an extraordinarily ominous dark side. And looking into Schubert's life just a little bit reveals what parallels you could draw between what anyone would be thinking in the last several months of their life. Schubert wrote this sonata and the two before it all at the same time in September of 1828. He died in November. There's some of the last pieces that he wrote, and they were rejected by his publisher. So for me, like I say in the program, it really feels like a meditation on death. But all of his friends, when writing about him, when writing about how his health was declining and we might not have much longer with Franz, they said he didn't seem to be particularly bothered by that fact. And I think that you hear that in this piece. The one last little tidbit I want to share before this piece, before I play all 4 movements without any narration, is that the pieces were initially sent to a publisher at the end of Schubert's life in 1828, but they were not published until 1838. By that time, Schumann, who wrote the Kreiseriana, and Mendelssohn had done so much to restore Schubert's reputation as a musician posthumously that the publisher who ended up publishing the last three piano sonatas of Schubert dedicated them to Schumann, who, believe it or not, didn't like them. So I love them. These are considered real masterpieces, some of the unparalleled works from the piano. So I hope you enjoy Schubert's 15th and last piano sonata in B flat major. As my students would tell you, I always have more to say. I will probably cry here. Could not be here today without some very important people to me. In no particular order, you guys, thank you. This is the first recital I've had since I was at Douglas Anderson, where Miss Vera Watson was my piano teacher for 4 years between 2009 and 2013. I've definitely never played anything of this scale, so thank you all for being here and listening to me. Second of all, Mary Noonan, my girlfriend. She has been an incredibly important part of every aspect of my life, but in particular to this performance. She designed the program, she kept me organized, she ushered people in, she kept me organized, she helped get all of the food in the room, and most importantly, she kept me organized. I love you so much, and I'm so grateful for you. The next two people, certainly at equal levels of importance, are my mom and my dad, both of whom are here tonight. They both gave me an incredibly special gift in not just being able to appreciate and listen to music and enjoy it at this, like, not necessarily pretentious classical type of way, but instead in the same sort of way that, you know, a Deadhead might, for instance. You know, it means so much to me. This is not something that I do because I want to show off. It's something that I do because I want to share with you. And Mom, I found the piano notebook that you used to take notes for my recitals at when I was like 10/18/2001. So I was very, very young, had just started. And then, obviously, Miss Watson, who was my teacher in high school, so that's already bizarre because I'm myself a high school teacher. I tutor her son. I played for her. She forced me to play this concert, which has changed my life for real. So thank you for that. I wasn't going to say that. And then the last person can't be here, but I would be. Nothing musically or otherwise without my piano teacher, Mr. Johnson, who saw it with the back of the program with his typical judgmental look. He was a remarkable man, and I remember this letter that he sent to me in college, which I probably read 6 to 7 months late. The end of the letter, he said that the reason that music is important is it is because what I think is our best path to the divine. And those words have never left me and will never leave me. So thank you to Mr. Johnson. I know typically there's a whole song and dance in terms of me coming out and going back and coming out and going back 3 or 4 times, but I have one more secret piece. This is truly a piano miniature. Schubert published it as a Russian air. It was eventually published as a moment musical, which he never gave it that title. If you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, you might recognize it. It is extremely catchy to the point where it is actually banned in the house. Mary cannot be there when I'm practicing. So this is Schubert's second musical moment in F minor.